Hello and welcome to the main press conference room in the 19th CPC National Congress Media Center here in Beijing. A group interview has just finished about rules-based law in China, and unfortunately we couldn't bring you the live feed because it was all in Chinese, but luckily we have an expert here to tell us what happened over the hour or two that went on just before us. It's actually been quite a busy day today here in the media centre. We've already had a press conference about anti-corruption, which we'll talk about a little as well. But for now, let me introduce Dean, who sat through the group interview just now, and is going to tell us what happened.
I'm glad to do that. John, well, let me to explain a little bit why I was in the press conference, as well as John wasn't, because the press conference didn't provide a translation service throughout it. Only the question bit were translated. But as you can hear behind us now, they are testing the microphone for the next press conference, which is to be held by the Ministry of Industry and Telecommunication, which our colleagues will bring you live coverage on all CGTN platforms as well.
Yeah, we'll bring you a preview of that one. But for now, we want to find out more about the rule of law in China. There were 5 people, legal experts from around China, different provinces, and they answered various questions. Should we take a seat and go through some of them?
I'm obliged to answer those questions, and I'll try my best. But the first thing I need to clarify a little bit for you is that this is quite different from the National People's Congress, which is about the government work, but this is about the party, how the Communist Party of China works. So the delegates, of course, they're experts, they're specialists in their respective areas, but they are not high-end officials. At least not every one of them is. So they are the practitioners of law on the very, very
the grassroots.
Yeah, the grassroots level. So what they could provide us with is insight into how those policies made by the party and made by the government is implemented. And that's what insight I got from them.
Okay, and since 2012, when Xi Jinping became General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, there's been some fairly far-reaching legal reforms. We don't want to go into too much detail, but can you give us a brief overview of some of the things that were touched on?
About legal reforms, that is the central topic of this press conference, and they've all provided some insights into that field. And I need to brief you about who those representatives are. I got a sheet here, and the information is contained in this sheet, and it's very thorough. We can glance at it. So one of the 5 is Mr. Zhu Guangyuan, and he joined the party in 1984 and began his professional career in August of the same year sorry, I need to find the information. Yes. He's currently the Deputy Secretary of the CPC Jiangsu Provincial Party Committee for Political and Legal Affairs. He's a party official as well as a government official. And also Song Yu-shui, and she is a Deputy Chief Judge working in Beijing. And interestingly, she also, she's a delegate to the 19th National Congress of the CPC, but also she works in China's IP court, that is intellectual property court, which is relatively new in.
Okay, and a fascinating topic for China at the moment.
Of course, and we will go through those points that she made during the conference, during the press conference, and also we also have a lawyer present, and another one from the police department, and another one is prosecutor.
Okay, great. I should point out that there's some noise going on behind us, which is because they're preparing for the second group interview, which will take place in about 2 hours' time.
So about in 7 p.m. Beijing time.
Okay, so apologies for that, but we can't do much about it. But first of all, we should ask how the legal reforms over the last 5 years have helped Chinese people. What have they done to help people individually?
Telling from what I gathered from this press conference, I mean, the most important point they made about the legal reform in China is to give more access to ordinary people to legal services. So in China, the rule of law, this conception isn't it's not stemmed from China. It is somehow, especially the modern conception of the rule of law, came from outside China. So during the ancient times, China didn't have this very clear separation of the legal service and the government. But now China is developing, is putting infrastructure, legal infrastructure, to benefit its people. So the delegates who was giving the press conference, they are at the front line of kind of implementing the party and the country's policies to guarantee that now in modern China, all people, all ordinary people, they're equal before law, and all access are guaranteed to them, so that they will have the protection to all their rights. I mean, that is the direction China's legal reform is going.
And does China's legal reform also include a huge increase in the number of legal professionals? Because I know that's something that in the past has made it difficult to implement such a far-reaching set of reforms. Is that there just weren't the people to do it with the expertise. Did the people in the press conference touch upon that, upon training of legal experts?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they did mention things, especially the police officer who was working as a forensic doctor. She provided an insight into how technology is provided with how technology helped her work, and also they now with the technological advancement, and they could put in place the training of with modern science and technology, and to make sure all the police officers, and especially working in her line of work, know how to employ scientific methods in their work, so that by employing more scientific methods and ways and means to help their work, they can guarantee the evidence, because the police officers, in a sense, the evidence that they gather with those modern means, it's sound, it's accurate, and then they could be able to give this evidence to the prosecutors, so they can press charges. So yes, now they do have proper training in place with all sorts of technologies they need to make sure the procedure is the procedure is respected.
Okay, and I was interested in one thing you said there about keeping evidence secure. Chain of custody is a very important part of the legal process everywhere around the world, of course. And I know in China there have been some high-profile cases in the past of some miscarriages of justice because evidence was tampered with or was misused for some reason. Is that something they spoke about keeping the importance of keeping the chain of custody intact?
Actually, that is a tough question. I mean, I'm not saying this out of my own judgment. It is about the miscarriage of justice is a question actually raised by the reporters present in the press conference. But interestingly, out of the 6 party representatives in the press conference, only one of them answered the question about miscarriages of justice, which I think it's emblematic of the fact that miscarriage of justice in China is still a situation that needs to be improved. But they do put in place to make sure that they can kind of preempt the miscarriage of justice by building up a proper system. Like they will put the check and the balance between the prosecutors and the police department and the court to make sure all the evidence are gathered legally. And then the prosecutors will go through the evidence and all the legal procedure through which those evidence are collected. And if the prosecutors spot any illegal gathered evidence, they will send the case back to the police department to reopen the investigation. And in the meantime, the miscarriage of justice is mostly kind of spotted during the after the court ruling. So the prosecutors will also review the court ruling to make sure the ruling is indisputable. Whenever they spot, the prosecutor spots something suspicious, they will demand a thorough review, and if there is a miscarriage of justice, they will demand a reopen of the case. And over the past years, because China has been putting a lot of effort to make sure that the miscarriage of justice is avoided, but over the past years, the Supreme Court of China, the People's Supreme Court of China, has demanded or had put quite a lot of effort in reviewing the cases, especially the cases about felony, because in those cases people's lives are in line. They will review all the cases to make sure that the justice has been served, so as to preempt the miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, I think nowadays the process has been put in place to make sure that miscarriages of justice are far less likely to happen. And also something that's happened over the last 5 years is that when things did happen, people were wrongly convicted in the past. There have been reviews of that process, and people have been exonerated, possibly a few years on, but have been given back their life and their name back as a result of some of these reforms that you were talking about earlier.
You mean now how many cases have been corrected?
No, I'm saying there have been many of them, and in fact there's a CGTN film which is coming out quite soon, which will detail some of those cases.
Yes.
To watch out for. Okay, that's very interesting. Something that the rule of law plays into is anti-corruption,
Yep.
which is another topic that we've been covering today, thanks to a press conference from the Deputy Secretary of the CCDI, Yong Xiaodu.
Yeah.
I know you were there for that as well. What were your reflections?
It's not an easy subject, not because the anti-corruption, and mainly it's because the anti-corruption campaign has been on headlines, not domestic headlines, but also international headlines for a very, very long time, actually since 2012. And this morning, in different live streams, I've already given a set of numbers about the achievements resulting from the anti-corruption drive in China. And the two things, the anti-corruption campaign and the rule of law, they are closely interrelated. Now the challenge present in front of the Communist Party of China is not just to find the corrupt officials, because they already have the system, they already have the right people to do that, because they have the inspections, and inspection is a fixed device to spot the corrupt officials, not just in the lower level, the grassroots level, but also on very high, the corrupt officials on high echelons. But what the party needs to do more is to put down the legal system and to revise the legal system and to put down more legislation and to guarantee that the entire campaign could be, expected by ordinary people, last long enough and to remain strong enough to keep exerting the pressure on the officials, be they corrupt or not, because we know that no official is corrupt by nature. At least I would rather to believe in that. But if they are given power, unmonitored, unsupervised, they will grow. Not every one of them, but some of them will develop the tendency to corruption. So now China has made some development on that score, like by putting down more legislation or more laws to guarantee that the punishment for people who are taking bribery on equal footing with those giving the briberies. So now the punishment is equally severe to both ends of a bribe. So this is one of the advancement made to achieve that.
Oh yeah, so it's an interesting development for sure. And I should remind you that we're reviewing a group interview about the rule of law in China, which my colleague Dean sat through and is giving us an overview of. And one thing I'm interested in is the international aspect of this. Xi Jinping has said in the past that China's rule of law shouldn't be based on international examples, but they should be used as a reference. Was that anything about that come up with the delegates today?
You mean by reference, you mean?
To learn from them, but not to copy them.
I don't think the party representatives had gone through that point very thoroughly. But I think in the the Party's working report it mentioned that because China has its own unique way, a unique path of development, and now China is at a stage of where it's still a developing country. So I think China needs to build up its own ecosystem with the Chinese characteristic to make sure that all the situation that comes inside China need to have a fit solution to it. I'm sure that China can learn a lot from other countries and to learn from the experience and the lessons. But we need to make sure what we need to be sure about is we need to digest it, to absorb the lessons. You don't want to just simply implant one system onto another country. That would be irresponsible.
No, you have to adapt to the circumstances for sure. Also, if we go back to the anti-corruption, I know you have a particular interest in the economic impact of the anti-corruption campaign. What can you share with us about that?
One aspect that I'm particularly interested in is the argument that we heard a lot about from the medias, especially foreign medias. The argument is that the anti-corruption campaign has bore economic cost, and the Chinese economy suffered somehow from that campaign. And I looked into that argument. I found it's a very interesting argument to make because it sounds very, very alarming and very, very real. It could have, because sometimes, especially this rumors around circulating in China's social media saying that a lot of luxury hotels need to downgrade their star rating because of the campaign, so that they can attract more guests. Because the government officials are not allowed to use service from those very high-rated hotels, and also that other luxury chains, be they selling whatever luxury goods, they also found that the consumers from China, the number of the Chinese consumers was somehow shrinking because of the campaign, that no one would want to buy luxury goods as a gift to officials.
Okay.
Before anything, I think, especially about the luxury goods part, that's simply not true. Because the consumption of luxury goods by Chinese consumers, I think, is on the rise.
Okay. Dispels that one.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's this argument is true about luxury goods, but also that doesn't mean that there isn't an economic aspect about the anti-corruption campaign. But I don't think that aspect is what this argument holds about. Rather, because now China's been putting in place some economic infrastructure, and China's been through a huge economic restructure. So my point is that the anti-corruption campaign plays into that economic restructure. Because you always need, no matter how grand your economic outlook is, you always need the people to be the practitioner of all the different trades. You always need to have the officials who are human beings. You need them to deal with all sorts of questions. So if those officials put in place to deal with the key economic issues, if they're corrupt, what kind of good outcome you could expect? So by conducting an anti-corruption campaign, the China can replace those corrupt officials with the one that has a clear meaning and which has a clear ideal to develop Chinese economy, and they can conduct their business in a more clean way and a pure way, whatever adjective you want to use. And that is on the microeconomic level instead of the macro one. On the macro level, they will help facilitate trade, facilitate business. They will cut the red tape. I think that is the benefit brought about by the anti-corruption campaign. That is my take on the economic side of this drive.
So a complex picture, but overall it's going to streamline processes within the governance of China.
Yes, I think so.
For the benefit of the economy. Okay, and having sat through the press conference this morning, I was struck by the fact that there was no let-up in the anti-corruption campaign. That the man from the CCDI was suggesting that this is going to continue for 5 years. 5 years more, there'll be no let-up. He said until no one dares, no one can, and no one wishes to be corrupt any longer. how do you see this moving forward? He very explicitly said that hedonism and extravagance have been tackled to a great extent in the previous 5 years, but formalism and bureaucratism are now going to be the chief targets. How do you see that progressing?
I think that also has something to do with the economic drive or the economic side of the anti-corruption campaign, because a lot of officials now they kind of already put in the right state. From my observation, I believe now they eventually be put in the right state where they do not dare to kind of reach their hands into something that don't belong to
where
them.
they shouldn't put them.
That grey area has been reduced. But in the meantime, this also creates among some officials a mindset, because making key decisions involves risk, because you could make a mistake, and some officials, because they're frightened of making those mistakes, because they're gonna a group and an army of inspectors behind their back, waiting, looking at them closely, watching the decisions. So they could develop a bit inactive towards decision making.
Held back by caution.
Exactly. So I think what the government and what the party can do to deal with that is to put down the right track, which is the rule of law. The government and the party, they need to tell the officials, okay, so there is a line, and they need to draw the line clearly, and that line is law. So as long as you behave, as long as you conduct, as long as you make a decision within the boundary of law, you are safe. Feel free to do whatever is right for your people and for the country's economy. So I think that is the point of why we need to keep the two major drives going forward together. One is the anti-corruption campaign. There's no way the Chinese government and the Communist Party of China can lose up on that drive. But in the meantime, to push forward legislation to not just to make sure that the corrupt official would be punished properly, but in the meantime, the officials who are in charge of making major policy decisions, they can be protected by law as well.
That's great. I think that's a nice place to wrap it up. You've done a full circle.
Well,
rule of law to anti-corruption, back to rule of law. Very neatly done.
You could have chosen a better time, because I've run out of things to say. One more question, I would collapse, I guess.
Okay. Well, then this is the end. Dean, thank you very much for your insights. It's very interesting.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be back in about an hour and a half with a preview of the next group interview, which is about industrialization and technology, with some other guests. So thank you very much. Keep watching CGTN Digital for more coverage of the 19th CPC National Congress, and we will see you later.
Seriously.